Hello, everyone, and welcome to this free public speaking course. My name is Tom Hendrick. I would like to teach you all today how to start your journey of speaking confidently without a script. And often to acquire the skill, it doesn't take that much time. I can see people significantly improve and even master this skill in 4 1-hour practice sessions. Today's your introduction to how to do that. And if you'd like to have a coach to help you get through those 4 1-hour sessions productively, then visit my website, tomhendrick.com. You can book your first 3 sessions, and there's even free classes every Friday lunch. So that way you can learn these skills for free if you so desire. Or you can book some paid coaching time after your first 3 sessions. So we're going to learn about how to speak confidently without a script in 4 1-hour sessions. And I'm going to teach you something called the repeat and count technique. And it's really powerful for Q&A, answering questions without any prior preparation, which can include not only like being on a conference panel and answering questions from the audience, not only being like a guest on a podcast, or maybe even in a job interview, but it can also be things like if you're suddenly asked to do a speech because a colleague is celebrating an anniversary or they're leaving and suddenly you have to give a speech and you're thrown under the bus. You can use this technique for improvised speeches from scratch as well. So my name's Tom Hendrick. I'm an online public speaking coach. I've coached lots of executives, PhDs, entrepreneurs, especially when it comes to pitching new technology for significant funding. I do a lot of workshops for a top 100 university here in Adelaide, and I'm going to teach you how you can reduce the fear of public speaking without a script. So let's start with some bad news and we'll get it out of the way, and it's all good news from here. So the bad news about public speaking is that you have a really involuntary part of your body which will produce nerves whenever you have an opportunity to speak in public. It's called the amygdala. It's a very central and low part of the brain, and usually things which are very central and low, close to the spinal column in the brain, are very involuntary and quick in nature. They happen in large volumes and before the more sensible, logical, slower thinking parts of your brain can kick in. And so what this does is that when this part of the body, the amygdala, it receives information from your other senses that detect whether something's a threat or not. This could be a threat to your reputation. It could be an environment that has lots of uncertainty and you need to be careful and you need to make sure that there's nothing nasty that's going to happen that you haven't thought of. It also happens when you have a feeling of being enclosed or surrounded. And you can see that instantly we've ticked 3 boxes that are true every time we speak in public. So we might say something stupid, and then a whole bunch of people think that we are stupid, and that's a risk to our reputation. You know, what if we say the wrong thing? What if people don't understand what we're saying? What if they're not laughing at our jokes? What if the technology, that the PowerPoint that we had fails? What if someone asks me a question and I'm not ready for it? Lots of things can happen that we can't control or that we can't think of ahead of time when it comes to public speaking. And also, you're facing one direction, the crowd, and everyone else in the room is facing the opposite direction to you. They're in the audience looking at you. And so inherently, when you're public speaking, you're surrounded. You're the only one talking, everyone else is facing you. And so because of this, your amygdala is just firing lots of adrenal signals like adrenaline, nerves, cortisol, stress, all of this sort of stuff throughout your body. And the bad news is that no matter how experienced you are, this will always happen. But some things to note. One is that we can get better at public speaking and more familiar with it so that these signals aren't as intense in the first place. Things like uncertainty, if we've been there and done that before, there are less uncertainty-related adrenaline signals. Also, we can reduce the effects by becoming more fit and healthy speakers. So a bit like a cyclist who has worked on their fitness and their strength and endurance so much that even though there's an enormous volume of pressure and burn, muscle fatigue going through their body, they have such a capacity to tolerate that lactic acid and that burn that they can continue at a high performance despite how much burn they're accumulating in their muscles and lactic acid they're accumulating in their muscles. Good speakers can become the same thing. You can have a higher pain threshold for nerves and tolerance, and you can perform better despite pressure. And so even though these signals will always happen, It's a little bit like how your ear can't not hear a door that's slamming in a room. It's involuntary, but we can still become more desensitized and more fit when it comes to dealing with these negative signals. And that leads us to the good news. And the rest of the presentation is all good news, thankfully. So, like I said before, we can adapt to the danger. We can increase our threshold. We can become more fit and courageous speakers by becoming more familiar with the process of public speaking. Another thing we can do is also change character. Sometimes a lot of this stuff is a mindset and a body posture thing. And there's a really interesting study on this. So this woman on the right here in front of Wonder Woman, she is a woman called Dr. Amy Cuddy. And she gave one of the most popular and interesting TED Talks ever given. And it was about something called power poses. And when it first came out, it was very controversial. A lot of people thought it was pseudoscience, including myself. But after that TED Talk, a meta study of 128 other different scientific experiments was conducted. And there was 128 different science experiments which all measured whether there was such a thing as power posing could improve your sense of confidence when it came to public speaking. And so what this looked like was a power pose is if you're nervous, nerves tend to show up in your body as physical movements. So if you're nervous, you might find yourself fidgeting, doing small, twitchy, involuntary movements. You might find yourself swaying. You might find yourself trying to make yourself small and like kind of covered up and protected and maybe even look like you're about to run away. And so Amy Cuddy did, and her experiments sort of showed, is that if we can't control how we feel because the amygdala is involuntary, we can control how we move, and it circuits back to how we feel, which can then, so if we can control we move, and we move instead of in a small, fidgety, protective sort of way, we open ourselves up and we make ourselves bigger and we move more deliberately and slowly. That signals back to our amygdala to reassure it that we're actually okay and that we're in control. And what these studies showed is that although you don't get 100% discount, for that, it does significantly take the edge off of your nerves. And so there is this body belief circuits where we can't control what we believe and what we feel. We can control how we move, and how we move can affect how we believe and feel. And so that's a really interesting technique for reducing nerves. What I often get people to do is now an activity where they can, and you can do this for yourself, think about what makes speaking challenging from the perspective of yourself, from the perspective of an audience, and from the perspective of someone else. And it could be like your boss or the organization that hires you that you're representing when you're speaking, that sort of thing. So some examples we often get are things like, from a speaker, it's challenging because you might not know whether the audience understands this content or if they're experienced in it. So it's nervous because there's uncertainty because you don't know what content will resonate more strongly with them. From a speaker, it's also challenging because you might know they've spoken in that room before, and so you don't know what the room can and can't do, if it's noisy, if there's distractions, if a microphone is needed, if the slides are really small, all this sort of things. Some other things that are challenging for the speaker might be whether or not the audience is like favorable or not, if they're going to heckle you, if they're going to interrupt you, if there's someone who's really difficult to deal with, and how you're going to work with that. So these are some challenges for the speaker. Some challenges for the audience might be how big the venue is. You might not be able to hear very well at the back. You might not have the ability to see the slides very well. You might want to interact, but you struggle to get the attention of the speaker, to ask a question or to participate in an activity. And there are some things that your boss might think. So it's like your boss might go, I hope this runs on time, because we've got lunch and things like that coming. The boss might be hoping that the speaker represents the crowd well. The boss might be hoping the audience gives good feedback. These are all reputational uncertainty and the sort of feeling of like the environment that we were talking about earlier. And by listing these things, we can make better sense of how nerves and performance can manifest in a room and what we can do to deal with it. So this is a very gross oversimplification of ways your stress can affect you physically, and then how you might control those involuntary physical movements so that you can reassure your amygdala and yourself that you're in fact in a state of control and confidence instead of being the victim of involuntary twitching and panicky nerve behaviors. And conveniently, these all start with the letter F. So fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This is an activity where I get people to assess what the nervous version of them looks like. And then we can find solutions for how to deal with that nervous version of them that shows up so that a more confident version of them can show up in a presentation. So some people, when they get really nervous, they become fighty, this sort of fight sense. Fighting can look like not just getting loud or intimidating or being short with other people's opinions and things like that. But fighting can also just mean really energized. It can mean talking too fast, getting too excited, rambling and forgetting your plan or your structure. And so fighting is a way that nerves can sort of over-energize someone. And when fighting is done too much, you often say things that you regret, or you take more than your fair share of the presentation, and it's too much about you and not enough about the audience, because you're simply too excited and too energized. Flighting is not just not wanting to speak, like running away. It can look like wanting to cut the presentation short. You may have planned to do Q&A or to speak for 30 minutes, but instead you only speak for 20 minutes and then quickly run back to your seat. And panicking and leaving out important details or missing out on opportunities to better interact with your audience. But flighting can also look like predicting all the uncertain things that might happen in the presentation very unfavorably while you're preparing. So if you're a flighty person, you might over prepare for presentations. You might write a speech, just constantly say it's not good enough, delete, rewrite, and just exhaust yourself before the presentation even happens. So rumination and perfectionism, worry and panic, these are all things that how nerves manifest as flighty behavior physically. And it often happens before the speech even happens. Then we got freeze, and freeze tends to happen during a presentation. It's very uncomfortable. It's often things like getting tense, maybe going red-faced, very flushed and feeling very physically nervous and sick in the presentation. It looks like going numb, just not being able to think. Your brain's completely abandoned you in the presentation. Getting stuck. It can sometimes look like hesitating. You might have a really important point to contribute, but you hesitate and then you miss your opportunities to do it because you're slow and you're tight. Freezing is very uncomfortable, and that's how nerves can manifest as freezing. The last one, a lot of people haven't heard of this, is called fawning. Fawning is essentially people pleasing. You can imagine that if you're in a threatening situation, like someone's yelling at you, it's a self-preservation reaction to be able to just tell them what they want to hear. To say like, yep, you're right, even though that's not the truth or what you intend to say. It looks like people pleasing. When it's done well, it looks like diplomacy. It looks like hearing everyone's voice and considering opinions peacefully. When done too much, fawning is essentially lying. It's also being all things to all people except yourself. And it's not defending the thing that you've been tasked with defending. It's giving up, essentially. And all of these things are there to protect you. They're good things, but only to a certain extent. And what we need to identify is when we become nervous, which one of these gets too intense that it becomes a bad thing. So think about for a second, if when you're under pressure, do you ever find yourself speaking too fast or getting a little bit too short and angry with other people? Do you find yourself over writing, over preparing for presentations or cutting them short? Do you find yourself getting stuck, getting tight, getting numb, getting blank in a presentation? That's a freezing behavior. Do you find yourself just giving up and people pleasing and telling people what they want to hear instead of telling them what they need to hear? That's fawning. And you identify which one of these that you are, then you know you now have a pathway to improvement. If you're someone who fawns, you might want to become more fighty or less fawny. So learn to defend a position. Learn to say things like no to people and be comfortable with the disappointment they might have in their face, and don't flinch. If you become a freezy person, learn to become a bit quicker. So instead of hesitating, just go, I have an idea, and leap in and back yourself to be able to complete the sentence once you've leapt in. If you're a flighty person, learn to accept like a budget of time to speak or to prepare and stick to it. And if you're a fighty person, learn to become either more diplomatic or to be less fighty. Try to do things to slow yourself down. Try to do things to be more patient with other people's perspectives instead of overpowering them. And likewise, if you find that the person you're speaking to has too much of these behaviors, you can do things to try and empower them to rebalance themselves. And so that's a bit of an introduction to where nerves and where they come from. The rest of this presentation is very practical in terms of skills that you can do so that in 4 one-hour sessions, you can master these skills and overcome these problems. So here's the very, very good news, that there's so much evidence and data and practice to show that people have developed these skills and mastered these skills in a short amount of time with the methodologies that I'm about to show. For example, in golf, it's a highly pressurized sport. It's one of the only sports where the player is entirely at fault for anything that goes wrong. No one's trying to tackle them. No one's changing the game underneath them in real time. The course is very fixed, and everything they do is based on their own actions. And so golfers get really nervous, even though they've hit millions of golf balls before. And a lot of sports scientists have worked with golfers to develop an answer to the question, I'm so nervous, what do I do? And the answer is, do what comes automatically to you. And they develop something as like a shot routine. And I'm about to give you a speaking routine so that you can speak confidently despite great pressure. And this is how quickly you can learn it. So on day one, we can call this day one if you're willing to do some practice. You're going to learn a framework. It's going to be called repeat and count. And you're going to understand how that framework works, like what a repeat is and what a count is. And once we learn those two concepts, you'll have gotten through what we call the learning phase. In this workshop today, if you do some practice, we won't just do lecturing and pure theory, we'll do practice. And this is the self-correction phase. So this is where we do quizzes. This is where we have a go at these skills. We look at back on our recording or our performance, or we receive feedback, and we find out what we did wrong or what we could have done better or what we did really well. And we adjust our performance and our behavior in light of that feedback. So it's called self-correction because it's like stopping yourself from doing it wrong and correcting yourself so that you do it better next time. And the last phase is that if we do enough self-correction and we do it correctly, so we do this, well for say 4 one-hour sessions. If you do this with a coach, the coach will self-correct basically for you, so you don't get this wrong. One day, like say on the 4th day, you'll wake up and it will be weird not to do the right thing every time. To use an example, if you just were to pick up a pen right now, it's sort of weird for you not to hold it correctly without thinking about it, right? It's automatic and it's effortless. And the same thing happens in speaking. Whenever I answer a question, like on a podcast or at a conference, it's weird for me not to use the repeat and count technique because I've practiced it so much that it's effortless and second nature. And what that means is that I am good at answering questions, even ones that are really difficult, because I have a very structured way of answering them that's based on very good principles. And we can get there very quickly. And what we basically do is we learn a little bit of theory, we do some quizzes and we practice that theory. We then do activities that go from easy difficulty to medium to hard difficulty. And eventually, if we self-correct correctly, we have good self-awareness, we find what we didn't do very well, we improve upon it. We'll wake up one day and it's weird not to do it correctly first go every time. So let's get into it. And I like to reassure you to say that this is not a skill that you have to think about one day. This is day one. So buckle up. We're about to get much better at public speaking very quickly by using the repeat and count technique. So what is repeat and count? Well, what I often get people to do is to pick a number between 1 and 100 If I were to just pick a random number, let's say 71, it's a fairly random number. There's all these questions that I've done ahead of time. And there's so many questions that I'd hope that people think that I haven't gone through and memorized every single one. Question 7.1, what is this? What makes a perfect workspace? Pretty random question. So this is me using the repeat and count technique to answer this question. So imagine someone from the audience has just said, Tom, what makes the perfect workspace? I'd say perfect. There are two things that make the perfect workspace. And I'll just take 1 minute to cover those two things. The first thing that makes the perfect workspace is the environment. And the other thing that makes the perfect workspace are the people. So in more detail, if we can optimize an ideal workspace environment, it would look like having good temperature controls that people aren't too uncomfortable, hot or cold when they're working. The perfect workspace environments would also be inspiring and colorful, but not distracting in nature. So maybe access to windows with a view, but not say access to moving people, on the street or down the hallway. And the perfect workspace would also have amenities that are comfortable, like a place to relax, to refresh with coffee, to talk with people about fresh ideas, so that your day is not the same day in, day out. And that brings me to the second ideal thing about a workspace for people. It's good to have a culture where people have a common goal they're working towards. They have the flexibility to talk to each other, but also not interrupt each other. And it's a friendly, professional, constantly innovating and inspiring environment full of people who have like-minded interests. And that's a vague description of what the perfect workplace looks like. Now, that's just me answering a question off the top of my head without any prior preparation. And I hope you agree that that was a fairly clear, concise, structured, maybe even insightful answer. And here's the thing, I'm not an expert in workplace design or anything like that, but by answering this question in a repeat count way, I'm able to access not just the first thing that comes to my mind, but the best thing that I'm able to come up with. It basically makes sure that I don't lose 100 intelligence points, when I'm under pressure answering a question, and I don't kick myself with regret after, answering it. And this is what a repeat and count is. I'll break it down for you in terms of the techniques. So a repeat is very simply when you say some or all of the words from the question back to the audience. So if you get a question like, what's the perfect workspace? In my example, I just said perfect. And so by saying the word perfect out loud, a lot of really good things can happen. Now, perfect wasn't the only thing I could have said. I could have said, this is the perfect workspace, or what is the perfect workspace? I think it has two components. So those are all examples of repeats. You could repeat the word, the whole sentence. You could even clarify the question and say, just to make sure on the same page, do you mean the perfect workspace for me or the perfect workspace in general? That's a clarification, and it also counts as a repeat. Basically saying some or all of the words back to the audience. What this does is it makes sure that you do not answer the wrong question. That is one of the biggest pitfalls and issues that people have in Q&A. They misinterpret the question. They distract themselves. They often say things like, oh, what a great question. And then when you do that, your mind starts to think of all the reasons why that's a great question, which isn't the question you're asked. So when you say the question itself back, or even just a word from the question back, it's making sure you've got the right question. It's allowing your brain to do something called word association. When I said the word perfect out loud, my brain starts to think of all the ways that a workspace can be perfect. And that's on topic for the question. It's also helping me think, I'm stalling without the audience thinking I'm stalling. It also is nice as an audience member to know that the person's understood you. There's a concept in communication called mirroring, where people enjoy when the person they're speaking to actively listens and parrots back or mirrors back the behaviors of that person. It makes people feel connected and part of a community. It's reassuring. Also, by repeating the question out loud, again, if there's audience members in the back of the room, or if it's a recording and people didn't hear the question the first time, it gives them a second go to be included in the conversation. Sometimes by repeating the question or by clarifying it, you get a better question. So someone said, tell me what the ideal workplace looks like. And I asked, as I repeated by saying, ideal. and just pause for a second, the question asker might be prompted to say, yeah, ideal as in, sustainability and price. And so now I've fetched a different and better question, having just allowed myself some time to think and allowing the other person to reinforce their question. Likewise, if I clarify the question in two, I can say, just to make sure we're on the same page, by ideal workplace, do you mean for me or for someone else, or in terms of cost, or like if budget was an issue? Again, they can say, yeah, the ideal workplace, money's no object. And that's a different and better question. Again, it buys me time to think. Most importantly, we mentioned this before, the answer to the question, I'm so nervous, what do I do, is do something comes automatically to you. And so if you always answer every question in a repeat and count structure, then by repeating the question, you are starting an automatic process. You're reminding your body that you've been here, you've done here before, and instantly you'll get an enormous drop in nerves that involuntarily would have happened when the question was coming up. One of my favorite things about this repeat and count structure, one of the biggest benefits, is that when you know that whatever question you get, your first move is just to repeat it, you become poised in an extremely confident way. So it doesn't matter what question you ask, I am just going to repeat it back. I'm basically smacking that question back as confidently as I can. Kind of like a tennis player who knows exactly where the ball's going to be. They're already winding up. They're already ready to smack it back. And so when someone asks a random question, if I just pick another one from this list, from the hard one, how does blockchain work? If the first thing that comes out of my mind is, I'm going to tell you how blockchain works, or blockchain. I just know whatever they say, I'm just going to say it out loud. My first words aren't or oh, that's a great question. I say something kind of insincere or random. I just guarantee that my first words are always productive and confident. And here's the thing, I've listed off heaps of benefits, and I could keep listing benefits, etc., 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 etc. There are so many reasons why repeating is a good idea, but it begs the question, why wouldn't you do this every time? It's a very safe, not wrong way of answering questions. There are just as many things for counts. I won't go through it as much, but basically, once you've got that question, once you start breaking it up into more simple, manageable pieces, it has lots of benefits for you, the speaker, the person who asked the question, but also other people, like audience in the back of the room, the host who's managing the whole event, the recorder who's putting it on YouTube, all that sort of stuff. When you break the question up into more manageable bits, even though you haven't answered the question yet, your preparation for the answer will seem like a very confident and authoritative answer. You get a question like, what's the ideal workplace? You go, the ideal workplace is a very complicated thing that's different to everyone, but there are two things that we need to know. And when you do that, you sound like the expert. You sound like you've already got your answer. And all you're really doing is getting your brain associated, familiar, and ready to actually say what you know about this topic, but by first measuring and just running up to it first before committing to an answer. And so it's a very powerful thing. And so the beauty of count is that there are infinitely many ways to count, so that your repeat and count techniques never becomes boring or repetitive or robotic in nature. I'll show you in a moment all the different ways to count. A great way to count is to split the question into opposites. So you take the question and go, I'm going to tell you what the ideal workplace doesn't look like. And that's easy. You can now talk about what the most horrendous, tragic workplace would look like. And then your answer, therefore, what the perfect workplace looks like, is better understood in comparison to what obviously it doesn't look like, because we're just flipping it. You can say, I'm going to tell you what the ideal workplace looked like in the past, like 10, 20, 100 years ago. And I'm going to then tell you what the ideal workplace looks like in the future or today. And again, like past and present, before and today, they're opposites. You can say, I'm going to tell you what the ideal workplace looks like on a budget or for a team of 2. And I'm going to tell you what the ideal workplace looks like for 1 million people, like for 1,000 people, where money is no object. And these are all both correct and interesting and insightful answers. And all we're doing is taking a question and splitting it up into more manageable questions. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many benefits. It raises the question, why wouldn't we do this? So now we're going to practice. So a really great way of starting on day one and getting better at this technique is to start really slow and to get faster smoothly as we progress. So we're going to start with a really easy activity. On this page are a list of questions, and all you have to do is have someone say them to you, and then you just practice repeating as confidently and as quickly as you can and as normally as you can the operative word. And the operative word is underlined. What I mean by that is if someone asks you the question, would you invest in a bakery? It's productive and useful to repeat the word bakery. Again, it's going to start word association in your mind. It's going to confirm to the speaker you understood the question. It's going to give you the opportunity to measure before you cut, prepare before you commit, all of these good communication properties. But if someone asks you the question, would you invest in a bakery? And you say, a or in are not the operative words in the sentence. But often there's not one right answer. There's multiple right answers in a sentence. So would you invest in a bakery? And you could say invest. And now you'll start to think about that question from a financial point of view, as opposed to what like a bakery is. If they said, would you invest in a bakery? And you said would, you might start to think about, whether this is hypothetical or realistic. And you can say, well, I would if I had this much money. I wouldn't if I, wasn't sure. And being good at being able to pick at least a correct answer when repeating a word is the skill, and it's very easy. And this is how we practice. So I'd ask you the question, would you invest in a bakery? And you say, bakery. I'd ask you, would you invest in a theme park? You would say, invest. Would you rather coffee or tea? And you'd say, coffee or tea? Would you rather have a home by the beach or in the mountains? A home. What's your dream job if money didn't matter? Dream job. If those are your opening words and they're done confidently, they're done clearly, they're done naturally, you've already become much better at answering questions under pressure just by having this immediate ability to make sure your first answer is always correct, productive, and confident. Now you can make it harder. Now this exercise is exactly the same as the previous one, but you'll notice I haven't underlined any words. So now you have to have the ability to guess or to make a commitment to the word you think is the operative word. And there are only few wrong answers. Usually most of these words are correct. So if I say, what does the ideal Sunday look like? You can say ideal or Sunday. Both are correct. Or even look like, what does it look like? Would you invest in a board game? Yeah, invest. Would you invest in a fashion store? Fashion. What's better, summer or winter? Summer or winter? Would you rather lose a phone or a wallet? Phone. And these are all ways you can answer the question. Now, the word approach has its pros and cons. The pro is that it's really simple. It comes across as very kind of authoritative and confident because you're saying so much with so few words. The downside of the word sentence is it doesn't offer a lot of mirroring or word association, but it just makes it really easy for you, the speaker, if you're particularly nervous. Sentence is a slightly harder repeat technique. And what you do is you say some or all of the words back. And to do this on easy mode, I'm going to just try to repeat these words as a question as best as you can. So if I said, what does the ideal birthday look like? You'd say, what does the ideal birthday look like? As your opening line. What's the best way to spend a rainy day? What is the best way to spend a rainy day? Would you invest in a jazz club? Invest in a jazz club. You can say some or all the words back, etc., etc. Get people, go through that list of 100 questions that we had before, get people to pick a random one and see how good you are at repeating some or all of the questions back as a question. And then to get slightly better at the sentence technique, you can repeat them back as statements instead of questions. Now, this is a more committal answer. So would you rather live on a boat or a bus? As a statement, you would confidently say back, I would rather live on a boat. Does that make sense? What's your go-to comfort food? I'm going to tell you what my go-to comfort food is. What's your dream festival or event? I'm going to tell you about my dream festival. And so your ability to repeat these questions back as statements shows people that you've listened. It shows people that you've got an answer ready to go. It also gives you time to measure before you cut your own answer out. And so that's a slightly more difficult technique than simply repeating the question back as it was. Now we're starting to change the sentence a little bit, but still using most of the words in that sentence. Now, the hardest repeating skill, and it's not that hard, but it is the hardest, is the ability to confidently and quickly and clearly split questions in two. We call that clarifying. There's heaps of ways you can do this. It's good to think about them in opposites. So split the question into like a big version and a small version, a personal version and an objective version like a me or a you, a general version or a specific version, an expensive version or a cheap version. So if you got the question, what's better, unlimited travel or time? You might say, do you mean unlimited travel or time if I had all the money in the world or if I had a small budget? That's like the expensive or cheap version. Would you rather live without the internet or air conditioning? So do you mean me living without internet or air conditioning, or like the world not having internet or air conditioning? And so by clarifying this, we can fetch a better question. We can also measure before we commit to an answer. Sometimes by asking a question back, we're even showing our expertise and knowledge in this idea because we can take a sentence and nuance it. If we skip ahead to question 5, would you invest in a chocolate factory? Is this a big chocolate factory or a small boutique chocolate factory? You can see that confidently and clearly coming out with an answer like that, again, does all the benefits that we spoke before about repeating and counting. So now the harder version of this is on this page, you had some things to prompt you. You could listen to a question, but you could be thinking about making it personal or objective. You could think about making it big or small, expensive or cheap. On this page, you have to do that, but now there are no prompts. So would you invest in a local newspaper? Am I investing today or like 10 years from now? That's a good clarifying question. What's better, being famous or anonymous? Are we talking about me or are we talking about generally being famous or anonymous? What's better, being early or fashionably late? Are we talking about in general or a specific thing like someone's birthday party? Make sense? So when you can do this automatically, really clearly, suddenly you'll be very, very good at repeating and counting just from mastering these basic techniques on easy mode and then on hard mode. So now that we've done a lot of work on repeating, but we need to also do work on counting. That's the second half of this. So to get a complete speech out of this, we need to not only repeat the question, but we need to then break up that question into countable parts. And so one of the techniques in the count phase is called summary detail. It's really interesting, especially when combined with the word technique for repeat, because now we're going to get a super confident, super abrupt answer, and then we'll invite the audience if they want a more detailed explanation. So this is a very committal, very brave way to answer a question. Sometimes even a little bit too brave. It can come across sometimes as arrogant, but it gives you the answer up front and then the directions later. So if you had the question, would you invest in a bakery? To use the summary detail, you'd say, would I invest in a bakery? No. Would you like to know why? So that's a count. So you're breaking up that question into two bits. The summary, which is the answer is no. And then the second phase is the detail. Would you like to know why? So what's your dream job if money didn't matter? Dream job. It would be a lawyer. Do you want to know why? And that's a confident way of answering that question into the answer up front and then invite people if they want the detail. It's a very, very good technique in two particular situations. One, if your audience is very angry or impatient and they're like, yes or no, what is it? And you say, yes. Do you want to know why? It can calm them down when you don't fluff or hide or delay the answer. The second thing is it's really good for when you might not have to give the detail, and so someone's already sold. They're like, should I get the red one or the blue one? You go, the blue one. Do you want to know why? They go, no, I'll just buy the blue one. I trust you. And now, you've cut out unnecessary effort and work and risk by simply providing the answer up front and being prepared to elaborate if necessary. The other good thing about the summary detail technique is that it kind of gives you another layer of repeat and count.
because when you do the detail, you just simply pick another way to count, like to fill that out. And here's another way to count. Call it one hand, other hand. So a bit like clarifying two, one hand, other hand is clarify, like giving your answer in two instead of repeating the question in two. So if we couple this with the sentence question repeat technique, it might look something like this. So what does the ideal birthday look like? I go, what does the ideal birthday look like? Well, there are two ways of looking at that. Like on the one hand, some people like a really big birthday. On the other hand, some people like a really small and intimate birthday. And so if I just continue the question, this is what the ideal big birthday for some people would look like. It's inviting 300 plus friends. We're booking out an entire like wedding or a function venue. There's just so many people like mingling. There's so many drinks. There's like catering and food carts. And it's just a really big, memorable, fun mixer of an event. There's lots of interesting people to talk to, and lots of celebration for someone's birthday. This is particularly good for like a 60th, like a major birthday. On the other hand, that might be someone's version of hell, and they prefer small, intimate birthdays. I know one person who actually prefers to spend their birthday alone. They have the whole day to themselves. Their partner takes care of all the responsibilities, like the kids and the meals and stuff like that. And that person just gets a day to sort of reflect on the year that's been. They do a bit of soul searching. They play a bit of golf. They play a bit of video games, and it's just recharges their batteries because the rest of their life is otherwise very full of responsibility and noise. And so that's the ideal scenario for two different people, whether it's a big birthday or a really small and intimate birthday. And again, that's me answering the question with no prior preparation, just allowing the repeat and count structure to provide organic structure and insight into this answer. So if we continue, we can apply another repeat count technique. This count technique is called problem, options, solution. So this is now, instead of splitting into two, we're splitting into three. It's a little bit more difficult and longer, but this is a particularly useful strategy when it comes to being persuasive about something. This is sort of showing thought process and why an idea is worth persisting with. If we couple it with a clarifier repeat technique, you can see how it might work. So let's say the question was, would you invest in a rooftop bar? And I might say something like, just to make sure I understand, am I investing in an existing rooftop bar, or am I basically buying a building from scratch and I have to build it all up myself? And then the person might clarify and say, no, this is a rooftop bar from scratch, like it's not an existing business. And I'd go, okay, so there are three things that we need to think about before investing in a rooftop bar business. The first is the problem, and think about what our options and our strategy is. And the last thing is whether we should do it or not, or the solution. And so the problem with investing in a brand new rooftop bar is that we will be very slow to open. So it'll involve a huge committal of time and cost before we see a dollar. And the other problem is that because it's never been done before, we don't know if there's going to be problems with the venue. We don't know if there actually is enough traffic, of people interested in rooftop bars in that area. We don't know if the building is sound. We'll have to do safety inspections and things like that. And we don't know if it's also going to be good for attracting like staff that we need to manage the rooftop bar. These are just problems with a new venue. And so our options would be that we have a budget that's spent on just getting everything checked and correct before we've spent too much time, too much money. So it's important to put a lock on how much time and money we're going to commit to before it becomes unfeasible. And then we have to have a really aggressive sales strategy. I think we need to make sure we get lots of buzz around this venue on time so that we have a really good first impression rather than like a slow start. Because if this is already a slow strategy, we have to go fast. Otherwise, we're at risk of losing all our time and money. And so that's what I'd propose. I would propose that if we invest in something, we need to first make sure we have the resources to get things right and to move quickly. And without those two things, I wouldn't invest in a rooftop bar. Now, I, again, don't have a lot of literacy when it comes to assessing the investment of rooftop bars. But I hope that you would agree that by going through that clarifying phase of, is this a new or an old rooftop bar, and then breaking it down so I can see some problems, we can do this or that, I choose this one. Does that make sense? And so this is a way of empowering people who otherwise don't have a lot of business literacy to be able to propose compelling and persuasive answers to questions by mastering the problem, options, and solutions recount technique. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got lots of different combinations. There's about basically 9 different combinations of ways we can answer a question so that we can always be original and interesting in our answers. You can repeat the word and do any one of these 3. You can repeat the sentence and do any one of those 3. Clarify and 2, do any one of these 3. Basically got 9 different combinations of things we can do. And now, with just those really simple techniques that don't take very long to master, again, it'll only take you maybe like in an hour, you can cover all of them. And in 4 one-hour sessions, you can become familiar to the point that you don't even have to have them tattooed on the back of your hand or anything like that to remember them. And by getting into that effortless and autonomous phase, you'll be so much better at appearing on podcasts, job interviews, taking questions from the audience, all that sort of thing, even conversations. And so that brings us to the end of this short and free public speaking workshop on repeat and count, how to use these techniques without any prior preparation under pressure. And I want you to think for a sec. I want you to think about, if you practice these skills, where your strengths and weaknesses are currently with repeating techniques and counting techniques. Are you good and confident at repeating the word? Or do you still find some hesitation there? Are you really confident at clarifying in 2? Or do you always stumble when it comes to picking the 2 things to split the question up into? Are you good at all the counting structures? Do you have one that you gravitate with? You might be really good at problem options solutions, but bad at, say, summary detail. I want you to think about where your strengths and your weaknesses are and plot them along this skill acquisition graph. Are you bad at them because you haven't learnt them yet? You don't understand how they work. Are you bad at them because when you attempt them, they come out wrong, in which case you're in the self-correction phase? Are you really close to getting them right, but you always sort of miss a small detail, in which case you're really late along the self-correction phase, and you're not very far away from entering into the effortless phase? If you can take these skills, you can cross them all over the line into the effortless phase. Not only will you wake up one day and you'll be able to do them without any thought, any effort, but your rate at which that you lose these skills is so slow that you will never lose them in your lifetime. The rate of decay and reversibility in the effortless phase is so logarithmically slow that you could not do this for 10 years and you'd only need, say, 10 minutes of refresher to be as good as you ever were at this skill. And that's the benefit of this skill acquisition model. It's just the minimum amount of time it takes to reach this glorious, effortless, and autonomous phase. And once you have that, these skills are your friends, not your enemies. You can do them on autopilot. You can do them despite great pressure. And reassuringly, you're not that far away from being just as good at these techniques as I am. So I want you to think that you won't learn these techniques just one day, but today is day 1. And it will only take you 4 days to learn them. And here's a little roadmap to how you can do that. You've done the exercises that I recommended in this video today, but tomorrow, or say no more than a week from now, try some really playful examples. Like try the different questions from 100 to 10. There's also a really good website called Yoodly, Yoodli, and you can set up things like public speaking role plays for yourself and have an AI prompt you with these questions if you don't have someone to practice with. On the next day, you can do this again with yourself, a friend, or with the Yoodli AI public speaking tool to do harder questions. And then on day 4, you can really test yourself in the same way. This is a screenshot of what Yoodli kind of looks like. It'll give you a transcript of what you said. You can assess you whether you use the techniques correctly or not and how you might improve upon them. And that's the free course on how to speak confidently without a script using repeat and count. I'm really interested to hear if you enjoyed the session, what you got out of today. My name is Tom Hendrick. I have 2 businesses, my personal business, Tom Hendrick Public Speaking, or tomhendrick.com. And I'm also a speaker for a wonderful group called Talent Academy. We're a bundle of specialist public speaking, people who do workshops for businesses. So if you or your team would like more public speaking training, visit me at tomhendrick.com
or at talentacademy.com.au, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next free course.